My name is Tom Jordan. I'm a friend of Mort Meisner, which all of you are as well. This is a huge night. This has been years in the making, the release of this book. And I don't know who's read it yet. I've read it, but I just want to introduce the man who wrote it. Mort Meisner has been a friend of mine for since 2007. So I know just enough to be dangerous, I think, for him. We met and he basically represented me. He's my agent, but we became very, very dear friends. And I've learned a lot about him. He's learned a lot about me, and our relationship has grown beyond this professional relationship. But it started off many, many years ago when he started representing me. And for some reason, he had in his head, he knew who I was better than I did myself. And for years, he thought I was, should I tell him the story?
Yeah, I was going to tell it. You can.
I'll tell it for you. So I had this inkling that he thought I was somebody who I wasn't. He kept saying things to me like, hey, listen, you know, we Jews got to stay together, and happy Hanukkah, and hey, what do you think of this? And I started I think he thinks I'm Jewish. And I'm not, but I love the Jews. So I used to tell him, he used to ask, hey, what kind of Jew are you? You know, those kinds of things. I'm like, well, I just love the Torah, which I do. I love Israel. So it finally came, the time that it convinced me that he thought I was Jewish was he's like, hey, Tom, I got this funny story I want to tell you. And I was still out in California at the time, and I said, go ahead, Mort. He goes, hey, this guy just came into my office, and I was showing him your video of you, and he looked at you, and he goes, I didn't know he was black. He goes, he's not black, he's Jewish. And I'm like, I'm neither one. So finally, I was moving out to Detroit, and my wife told me, Tom, you got to tell him the truth. So I said, Mort, I have something to tell you. He goes, yeah, what is it? I said, well, you know about being Jewish? He goes, yeah, by the way, what, are you a conservative Jew? Are you Orthodox? I said, I am actually not Jewish. And he goes, oh, okay, I just assumed you were. But anyway, from there, our friendship has only grown. I love the man. He's opened up his heart. He's born his soul. And to do this, he had to first do one of the most difficult things to do, and that is to open up to his family first. And he laid everything out. This is a personal book that tells a lot of phenomenal stories in the life of Mort Meisner. Ladies and gentlemen, Mort Meisner.
Thanks. Thanks so much. And yeah, with a name like Zimbelman, how could I knew he wasn't Scottish. Yeah, this book, it's taken, it took a lot of effort, and I have to acknowledge it took a lot out of me emotionally coming to grips with this book. Finding someone to write it with me was a challenge. First, I found a woman who was an English professor at Michigan, but it turned out she was a cutter, meaning she liked cutting her wrists, which was problematic, you know, really. Then after she wrote the first chapter, she emailed me that she had moved to Russia. So I knew that wasn't going to work. So I met this other woman named Stephanie Roop, who wrote the book with me. I met her over coffee, and she did a terrific job. But how we got here is, man, the book opens up with me witnessing a race riot in 1960 at my elementary school. And a lot of racist white parents were throwing rocks at a bus of what was called colored kids back then. And I still remember a little boy, his name was Gregory, Poindexter was his name, hit in the face with a rock. Blood is dripping down his face. I'm crying, my mother's crying, and when I go home that night, I say to my dad, who was really a real-life Ralph Cramden, 350 pounds, that's why he died at 70, but he was a cab driver. I asked my dad, what does the N-word mean? And he punched me in the mouth and said, don't ever say that word again. 2 years later, I asked my dad what the F word meant. He punched me in the mouth again, so I learned, stop asking questions and what have you. But had a very humble upbringing. We were evicted numerous times. Became a pretty major rock and roll promoter in the 70s. Promoted every major group, There's some stories in there. Then I had the good fortune of working in TV news, working with people like Bill Bonds here, the team that hired Oprah Winfrey. We talk about that, and we talk about my career in as an agent. And I do have the privilege of representing Tom. But 1981 to 89, I really had a major cocaine, you can call it habit, you can call it addiction, you can call it string beans. Because what I learned from people in the treatment industry is whatever we call it doesn't matter. And I was told that the definition of whether it's addiction or alcoholism is that which causes you one or more problems is a problem. So I had a problem with it, but I was told it's the one lie you should tell your kids. Never tell your kids you had a drug problem, which is a mistake in retrospect. So unfortunately, or fortunately, my oldest son, who's 38, was aware of it, years later, because my ex-wife told him. What a surprise. But he also told this guy, my son Mark, and for years, Mark harbored some anger or resentment or disappointment. And when I found out of that, I was really heartbroken. So I decided I would have a family get-together about 2 years ago. And I just laid it out. I said, look, it isn't a good reason that we were all doing it, but we were. It was such a prevalent drug that Jody Powell, who is President Carter's chief of staff, in a Time magazine article in 1979 said, thank God for cocaine. It's a safe recreational drug. Well, it's not recreational and it's not safe. I tell people, if my ass was on fire and the only way I could put it out would be to snort a line, I would just say, let it burn, And after that came out to my family, I felt that I could tell anything and everything in the book. It's why I had delayed it, because a memoir is something you really need to come clean and talk about where you've been, where you are, and where you're going. And I feel like, the stories about my upbringing, the drug use, rock and roll, TV news, it's really been responsible for a lot of my great friendships of so many people I know from the news industry, the music industry, baseball, softball. Certainly want to thank everyone in my family, Tony, Leslie, Mark, Nicole, Jason, who's not here, my nephew, Andy Meisner, who's looking for a job if anyone wants to hire him. I told him now is the real chance to get a real job, right? And he's going to do that. Great guy who I love very much. In fact, the first time I met him, when he was born, I was smoking a joint in Oak Park at the house that is on the back of the book, in fact. And I raced to the hospital, and there we were under the influence of cheap weed, because it was all cheap back then. But, I want to thank certainly everyone for coming, especially with COVID. It's such, to those people that think the pandemic's going to end on November 4th, not going to end anytime soon. And I don't know if we'll ever go back to the way we were, but I'm grateful for those that are here, grateful for those that could not make it as well. I want to thank Elizabeth Atkins. Elizabeth, can you stand up? Elizabeth is my publisher. And Elizabeth, along with her sister, owns Two Sisters Writing and Publishing, based here in Detroit. And her mom's fairly well known, former chief judge in Wayne County Circuit Court. And it was such an amazing collaboration. I pictured writing a book, fighting back and forth, pulling teeth, this and that, but we never had anything close to that, and we're real pleased. The book is a bestseller so far on Amazon, outselling, for point of reference, Rachel Maddow's memoir and Megyn Kelly's memoir. So it shows there's a lot of people that you can fool a lot of the time. But on that note, thank all of you. I saw Brian and Kelly and Martha and Julia come in. Thank you, and God bless all of you. And also a special thanks to Greg Posey, if he's still here, former teammate of mine, and the Khalils. I don't want to leave anyone out, so I'm going to do a blanket thank you to all of you, and hope you have a good time the rest of the night.